I'll begin the questions for 5 minutes. Ms. Gohmert, the memo and issue here today tells agencies to use landscape and watershed scale planning when considering mitigation. How do you plan to define what constitutes federal landscape or watershed?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. So let me just start out by saying that it is not the intention of the memo to define these actions. A memo is a tool to organize the activity across existing statutes.
Okay,
so there
well,
are
the question
several
was how we were going to define it. So
that would be a question that my colleagues can answer for you, because it'll be based on their existing
so
statutes.
you send out the memo and you use these terms, landscape and watershed, and you're going to let everybody gets the memo define those the way they want to? Seriously?
That is the way the presidential memo is a non-binding agreement. So this is simply the president's communication with his agencies on what he sees as priorities.
Well, see, that's one of the concerns that some of us have. Normally, and especially as someone that's handled felony cases for years, we want specificity in the law, so we know the limits of the government, the limits of where it's going. And when we see vague, ambiguous language or words that have not been defined in the law, and it seems to be an abundance of those type words. It seems like sometimes in this administration, people are looking for words that have never been legally defined so that the sky can be the limit. And that's one of the concerns here with the use of watershed and landscape. Whose landscape are we talking about? What extent of landscape are we talking about? And the fact that you would lay it off on the other agencies causes me even more concern, because holy cow, you're not being finite in what you're designating in your memo should be done. And when you leave it to each agency to just brainstorm and come up with what you think the watershed or the landscape, what does it feel like today? Maybe one agency it feels one way one day and a different. I would suggest that if you're going to use language that's vague, ambiguous, and not otherwise legally defined, then somebody needs to define it before you send instructions out to the agencies. Was the purpose, Ms. Gohmert, to make it intentionally obtuse so that people would use their own definition and perhaps go beyond the normal federal limits?
No, presidential memo cannot do that. In this case, there are several different statutes like FLIPMA and the forest management planning
okay, but in any of those
manage
statutes, do they use the term federal landscape or watershed in describing what should be considered for mitigation?
The statutes have definitions that vary. So there are, and that is up to each agency to look at their own statutes and regulations for those definitions. So
when this memo is constructed, you're telling me you don't want to be bound by any statutes or laws. You want to just go ahead and start fresh and create a new horizon is what it sounds like. That's really scary for people that are concerned about the overreach of the government.
It is just not possible to use a memo like this to have that overreach. It is bound by existing laws that Congress passed and that these agencies institute the regulations to carry it out. So it is not possible, and a memo does not have that binding legal authority that you're referencing.
The memo calls for, quote, large-scale plans and analysis, unquote, to inform the identification of areas where development may be appropriate on or quote, where natural resource values are irreplaceable, unquote. Does the administration's budget request include this direction, and what is the estimated cost?
I cannot answer that for you. I'm sorry. We could, I can take that back and see what we've got, but that definition of irreplaceable.
Well, who came up with those words?
Yes, and once again, this is a memo directed to our
agencies. Who came up with the words is the question.
Who came up with the words?
Who came up with the words?
Well, as CEQ, along with the agencies, our role is to coordinate across these agencies to see what their best practices are. And through that work, which really started in an effort to streamline infrastructure permitting, We've been convening the agencies for quite some time. And as we went through that process, we learned a lot about what is the best practices, and that's what we put in this memo. So that's where
they're the
words
ones
came
that previously used the terminology I've been asking about. You got it from these other agencies, put it in your memo, and nobody has accurately defined that. Is that what I'm hearing?
Once again, I would say it's up to each agency that has a mitigation
Well, that wasn't the
policy to
question, it's
define
where
the
the
terms
language
based on their
came from.
statutes.
Well, my time has expired for this round. Time will begin the second round. Mr. Bean, you had indicated earlier the importance of consistency and transparency. So in the name of transparency, would you tell us what stakeholders that your agency collaborated with during the development of this memorandum, and what stakeholders you will consult with as you develop the regulations to implement the mitigation policy?
The Fish and Wildlife Service is currently working to revise its 1981 policy. It's also working to revise its 2003 policy on compensatory mitigation under the Endangered Species Act. And it is also working to finalize a proposed policy, with respect to pre-listing mitigation credits for endangered species. In each of those cases, the service will, and in one case already has, put out for public comment its proposed revisions or its proposed policies.
Okay, so far you haven't answered my question at all. What stakeholders did your agency consult with?
In developing these policy proposals that will be out for public review,
Yes.
I'm not aware that of any outreach in particular to stakeholders for those policies. Those were internally generated proposals that now go through a public notice and comment process. We will hear from stakeholders. We've already heard from stakeholders with respect to the pre-listing mitigation policy.
Are you telling us that in preparation of the development of this memorandum that you didn't consult with any stakeholders?
I referred to three policy proposals. One, a revision of the 1981 general mitigation policy. Two,
but I'm talking about specific stakeholders that you consulted with
for
about
those three policies.
revising
No.
those.
For those three policies, I'm not aware of any.
So you feel like there's enough expertise within your agency that you can just come out with memorandum and policy, and without consulting any of the people involved, any of the stakeholders, any of the landowners?
No, I would
any
not
of
say. I would not say that. I
the
would say
state or local government, that you can come up with a policy that will not improperly or adversely affect them unnecessarily just by consulting just the people
no. I would
in
not
the
say
little
that, sir.
bureaucratic office.
What I would say is the service would look to 35 years of experience implementing its existing policy in determining what revisions are appropriate. It would look to the experience of the Corps of Engineers and EPA under their 2008 policy to learn what's worked well for them. So all of that information.
So these, again, you're telling me all federal agencies, and you're not telling me anybody, state, local, landowners that you've consulted with about something that is going to have a powerful and potentially devastating effect on people as you go forward with your policies. Well, let me move over. Ms. Gohmert, again, in following up on Mr. Bean's mention of transparency. We know, for example, historically that John Adams told Thomas Jefferson, you do the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, you're the best writer we've got. He did it alone. He gave it to John Adams. John Adams was blown away, it was so good. Apparently he made no changes. They both showed to Benjamin Franklin. Franklin made some interlineations, and I understand they may actually have the original that he wrote on. With regard to this memo, who was it that did the first draft?
I'm not sure I can share exactly the first person. I will say we have many stakeholders through the process that we did talk to around the memorandum, also in the infrastructure permitting capacity.
Yep, then maybe you can share with us what stakeholders you consulted.
So one of the most interesting pieces of what's come out of this mitigation banking setup is how the states are engaging. One example is Barrick Gold has a very interesting proposal where they have their own, very own mitigation bank. So they are conserving species on their own land, and then as they expand their gold mine, they'll be able to take credit for the species that they are restoring elsewhere. So it is those industries that have been successful, and this is not, this
So
is not
do you have
philanthropy.
specifics
This is
there?
real return on investment in terms of
But
what we've seen with
specifically,
mitigation.
who were the stakeholders you
This was
consulted?
a long process, so I can't say off the top of my head every single stakeholder we talked to, but we spoke to states, we spoke to industry, we spoke to
But you can't
many
tell me
types of
anybody
organizations.
specifically.
Well, I just mentioned Barrick Gold as one of the
Okay.
organizations. We've spoken to oil and gas companies that I know the agency as well has worked with to see what's worked for them. But really, it is industry that has found this mitigation banking works well for them, conservation banking works well for them, so they are the
Specific
experts.
industry, did you say, or just industry in general, everybody?
Barrick Gold is a gold mining company.
I know
There
you
are other
mentioned-
companies. Then there are oil and gas companies, small.
Well, that's pretty vague. Well, environmental groups, what environmental groups? That's
So it may surprise you, but there is sometimes concern from environmental groups that this will lead to more development. So they are not necessarily the largest proponents of this. We have worked with some organizations that themselves own land or are part of mitigation banking efforts.
all right, I'm shocked, I tell you.